The Holy Gospel according to Mark. As Jesus and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. During my first couple of years as a pastor, I met weekly with an interfaith group of diverse people as we launched a food bank in Sarasota, Florida. And one woman in that group who was a lawyer and quite skilled in navigating the many forms we needed to file with government agencies to establish this new nonprofit organization also happened to be blind. I recall that even though her eyes didn't provide her with adequate visual stimuli, she possessed an amazing amount of insight. I've noticed a similar trait of perceptive discernment in other blind friends and acquaintances that I've known over the years. This morning, I glimpsed this characteristic in the blind beggar Bartimaeus. How did he know to call for Jesus in the way that he did? "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." He must have possessed incredible insight. Declaring him a son of David was a political statement affirming that Jesus was of royal lineage and thus had power and authority to rule. Bartimaeus somehow knew deep down that this Jesus could help him. This Jesus could change his lot in life. It seems to me that Bartimaeus wasn't the only one who was changed during his encounter with Jesus. We could even say that Bartimaeus wasn't the only one to regain sight that day. As a blind beggar, Bartimaeus was on the bottom of society, dispossessed and marginalized, dependent on whatever people could spare to sustain his survival. When he first heard that Jesus was there and started calling out for him, the crowd tried to hush him up. It seems that they were blinded to Bartimaeus' very humanity. They were blind to the reality that this blind beggar, whose name Bartimaeus literally means son of the unclean, was a beloved child of God in need of healing, not only to regain his sight, but also to overcome his marginalized state in that society. I wonder today how we might sometimes function like the crowd did in that day, finding ways to keep certain people in their place, those not worthy enough to trouble the rabbi with their presence. How are we blind to the humanity of the mentally ill, the homeless, the drug addicts, and those stuck in a cycle of poverty? Have we not all been blinded at times by a myth of white European superiority that marginalizes people of color? We're often blind to the history of how indigenous people of North America, plus that institution of slavery and Jim Crow laws and practices, kept many in their place at the bottom of our society. In 2015 and 16, my daughter Anna spent a year in Africa as part of the ELCA's Young Adult and Global Mission Program. She was placed with a congregation in Manzini, Swaziland, that had a preschool that she worked in. And on many days, the only white face she saw came from looking in a mirror. And she once shared with me that the status of that particular preschool grew among the local population once it became known that a white woman was working there. I find it unsettling that a predominantly black African community could also be blinded by the myth of white superiority. Now, Bartimaeus isn't the only one in the story who needs to see more clearly, as I've said. That Jericho crowd who gathered to see Jesus off actually begins to take their cues from Jesus in how they see and relate to Bartimaeus. Perhaps the scales were falling from their eyes as well. I've also come to realize that the more that I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. Likewise, the more history and realities that I discover I've been blind to, the more I wonder how much I remain blind to. The story of Bartimaeus also isn't just a healing story, it's also a call story. For Jesus says, "Call him here." And now the crowd stops trying to shut him up and instead gives him some encouragement. I think they were finally seeing Bartimaeus differently when they tell him, "Take heart, get up, he's calling you." In Eugene Peterson's paraphrased version of the Bible, he even has them saying to him, "Hey, it's your lucky day." Perhaps it's ours as well. When Bartimaeus hears the call, he throws off his cloak and in effect leaves his begging way of life behind. For beggars in those days would lay out their cloaks to collect whatever people might give them. I see this as an act of trust that Jesus will help him. So he throws off his cloak and comes to him. I wonder what I need to throw off in order to come to Jesus. And then Jesus asks him a question that gives this one who's been living on the margins respect and agency in what he needs help with. Jesus asks, "What do you want me to do for you?" It's the same question Jesus just previously asked his two disciples, James and John, when they had their designs on sitting at Jesus' right and left in his glory. What do you want me to do for you? How would you answer? Imagine Jesus standing before you right now. What do you want me to do for you? How might you need healing? How might Jesus restore you this very day to wholeness? Well, Bartimaeus knows what he wants. He wants to see again. And perhaps his request can be ours as well. Perhaps we need to see more clearly in whatever ways we have been blind. Perhaps we need to see how a mentality of scarcity has blinded us to the abundance all around us. We may need to glimpse joy where before we saw only sorrow. We may be blind to the very things that would bring deeper meaning and purpose to our lives. Or maybe our guilt has blinded us to God's deep well of forgiveness. And maybe, just maybe, we've been blind to the simple truth that we are God's beloved. There's a story told among Zen Buddhists about a nun who one day approached a great patriarch to ask if he had any insight into the sacred text she had been reading. I am illiterate, the man replied, but perhaps you could read the words to me, and I could understand the truth that lies behind them. Incredulous, the nun responded, if you do not know even the characters as they are written in the text, then how can you expect to know the truth to which they point? Well, patiently, the patriarch offered his answer, which has become a spiritual saying for the ages. Truth has nothing to do with words. Truth can be likened to the bright moon in the sky. Words, in this case, can be likened to a finger. The finger can point to the moon's location. However, the finger is not the moon. To look at the moon, it is necessary to gaze beyond the finger. Open our eyes, O God, to see and experience your loving presence that all of our words, metaphors, and images point to. Open our eyes to see the truth of your life-giving presence all around us. Open our eyes to see how we've been blind. Open our eyes to see how we turn away or cut ourselves off from your gracious love. Open our eyes to see how people are deprived by poverty and all forms of injustice and oppression. Open our eyes to see anew our intimate connection with your whole creation. Open our eyes to see one another as your beloved children. Open our eyes to see the way of the cross as the way that we too, like Bartimaeus, are called to follow. Open our eyes to see your guiding presence within and all around us. For like Bartimaeus, we too want to see again. And Jesus tells us, that the power to see again, the power that removes the blinders from our eyes, the power to restore us is already within us. Go, your faith has made you well. And so may we too, like Bartimaeus, have our blind eyes opened so that we might see the path that God calls us this day to follow. Amen.